Hello, fellow space enthusiasts. The Mercury, Gemini and Apollo astronauts had their fair share of nicknames. Let's take a look at some of them in this video. Before we jump straight in, I'd like to thank all of those who have already subscribed and helped this channel grow. Don't forget to hit the like button and comment on the videos you enjoy watching. Probably the most famous nickname of any astronaut is that belonging to Buzz Aldrin.
And I had two older sisters, so I was referred to as their brother. But they couldn't pronounce that. It came out Buzzer. So for the first 5 years, I guess, of my life, I was Buzzer. And then I became Buzz. And everybody just called me that.
In 1988, the nickname became the name.
I decided to just legalize and change my name in court legally. So it's that way in my passport and driver's license. No middle initial, just Buzz Aldrin.
As well as Buzz, he would also be called Dr. Rendezvous. He would say of this designation, "I'm sure that the fact I was called Dr. Rendezvous was not always meant as praise." He was called this at NASA because of his expertise on the subject and his willingness to discuss it with anyone. At MIT, he earned a Doctor of Science, entitling his thesis, "Line of Sight Guidance Techniques for Manned Orbital Rendezvous." During Gemini 12, he had the opportunity to use his knowledge on the subject when the man had to take over from the machine. Losing their radar lock on the Agena target vehicle, Aldrin took over and used a sextant and charts to perform the rendezvous. Another well-known nickname is that of Gus Grissom, who was born Virgil Ivan Grissom. In the book, Gus Grissom, the Lost Astronaut, it says that in his younger years he had the nickname Greasy, but this name was replaced thanks to a game of cards. The story of how he acquired the name he would go by as an astronaut is detailed in this book, Starfall. Years later, in a card game, an acquaintance would read Gris upside down on a scorecard and translate it mistakenly to Gus, so it became Gus Grissom. Fellow Mercury 7 astronaut Donald Kent Slayton, who as the director of flight crew operations put the crews together, was better known by the name Deke. The name came about during his time as a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base and is explained in the book, Deke. There were two guys named Don, and that turned out to be confusing in air-to-ground chatter, so they started calling me DK. Pretty soon it just became Deke. The astronaut's other boss, Alan Shepard Jr., who served as chief of the astronaut office, had a number of names that he was called. The ones behind his back are for the most part unrepeatable. Like this candle details two of those names. Some of the NASA contractors called him the Snake, while a Life magazine writer called him, amongst other things, the Enforcer. The reason for the less than pleasant names he got called by the people who worked with him was in large part because of the fact that he had been grounded, and he took it badly. Shepard became, in his own words, a rotten SOB. He was known as the Icy Commander, and his cold laser-like stare could go through whoever was on the receiving end of one of his reprimands. Cernan would describe Shepard's demeanour when dishing out one of his admonishments as being like a snake about to devour a mouse. Gunter Wendt wrote about Shepard's behaviour after being grounded. Al had always been a guy who could take your head off with one clean slice. Having been tied to a desk, he now became a man to be truly feared. Most of the astronauts tried to avoid him as much as possible. Fortunately for everyone at the Cape, Shepard was in Houston. After he got back from the moon on Apollo 14, Shepard mellowed just a little bit and dropped the rotten and called himself just an SOB. He was also sometimes called Jose because of his impersonations of the character Jose Jimenez performed by comedian Bill Dana.
I've been noticing this, Mr. Jimenez. What is this called? A crash helmet?
Oh, I hope not.
Keeping with the Mercury 7, Walter Marty Schirra Jr. was also known as Jolly Wally because he lived by the credo, "A little levity is appropriate in a dangerous trade." He was known for his gags or gotchas, probably the best known of which is the corned beef sandwich that was flown aboard Gemini 3. In the book, In the Shadow of the Moon, it states that Schirra bought the sandwich at a local deli and gave it to Young just before launch. The joke would be taken a little more serious on the Earth, with the House of Representatives Appropriations Committee meeting to discuss the matter. Democrat Representative George Shipley of Illinois would call the smuggling of a sandwich aboard the vehicle disgusting. The furore over the contraband resulted in George Mueller, NASA's associate administrator, having to issue an order that following the corned beef sandwich scandal, no further repeat of this unsanctioned action would take place. Schirra also had a lesser-known name that has two possible origins. One relates to a ceremony where the astronauts were being introduced, and the guy introducing them said Skyray instead of Schirra. I will let the man himself tell the other story of how this name came to be.
So I'm back at Patuxent, writing up a test report in test pilot school on an F4D called the Skyray, which I took as my handle. They call me Skyray. Shepard calls me Skyray all the time. We're dead. My wife still does.
Astronauts Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr. and Malcolm Scott Carpenter are more well known for going by their middle names. This was something that Thomas Kenneth Ken Mattingly II and Ronnie Walter Walt Cunningham also did. John Herschel Glenn Jr. had the nickname Bud when he was growing up in New Concord, Ohio, and was called Herschel by Schirra, who used his middle name when talking to him. It was Glenn who bestowed pad leader Gunther Franz Wendt with his nickname. During the Second World War, Wendt had served with the Luftwaffe as a flight engineer on a Junkers 88. He had the misfortune to be shot down twice, once by the British and once accidentally by his own side. After that, he joined the paratroopers, fighting opposite the Americans in the Ardennes offensive, and being one of only 12 survivors from his corps of 246 men. He is better known for working in the White Room, preparing the crews for launch, and becoming known for his strict adherence to the procedures. Conrad humorously called him a dictator. Wendt would write in his book, The Unbroken Chain, "You're just like the Führer," John snapped at me one day. Everyone around erupted into laughter, and the nickname stuck. From then on, I was the Führer of the launch pad. When it came to signing his autograph, Wendt preferred to use the title Pad Leader instead of Pad Führer. When it comes to the new 9 or the next 9, there are a number of astronauts who had nicknames. Charles Conrad Jr., the third man on the moon, was more commonly called Pete. It was a name that, according to the book Rocket Man, had its origins in his mother's desire to avoid the complications of having two people in the same house called Charles, and didn't see any reason to have Junior after her son's name. She would eventually compromise, and although he would be given the name Charles, no middle name Conrad, she declared, he will be called Peter. He would indeed be called Peter until his future father-in-law, impressed by the young man courting his daughter, slapped him on the back during a visit to the family ranch and said, "You know something, Pete, you're all right." From then on, he would go by the name Pete. Although known as Pete, he would usually sign his autograph as Charles Conrad. He would also go by two other names, one more respectable than the other. The first was Princeton Pete, because of his time at Princeton. Conrad also had the moniker Tweety associated with himself, after the wisecracking cartoon character. Cernan wrote in his book, Last Man on the Moon, Pete Conrad, a tough little gap-toothed guy known as Tweety, was on fire all the time. It is said that James Lovell gave Conrad this nickname because he was short, blonde balding, big-nosed, and a wise ass like Tweety Bird. Cernan's book would also detail two other astronaut nicknames, the first being that of Thomas Patton Stafford, who had the nickname Mumbles. Cernan describes how Stafford, or TP as he was also known as, got this name. His habit of trying to speak faster than he thinks earned him the nickname of Mumbles. The second belonged to James Arthur Lovell Jr., who had the unfortunate nickname of Shaky. According to Cernan, it was Conrad who gave Lovell the intimidating nickname of Shaky. Pete Conrad had been in the same class as Lovell during a test pilot training course at the Naval Air Test Centre. With his sense of humour, Conrad found it funny to call Lovell Shaky, something a test pilot should never be. Edward Higgins White II would go by the name Red at West Point because of his hair colour. John Watts Young was another astronaut who was called Jose because of his impersonation of the Bill Danner character Jose Jimenez.
Okay, Jose, say adios, and we'll see you back in about 6 hours. Right. And don't accept any TEI update.
I have also heard Young called Bubbles, but I haven't been able to find out why. Maybe it had something to do with oranges. Other astronauts with a nickname include Fred Wallace Hayes Jr., who was given the nickname of Pecky at school. Hayes explained how he acquired this name at the dedication of a statue in his honour in his hometown of Biloxi, Mississippi.
They made me the woodpecker because I didn't have to sing, and I got the name Pecky because teachers decided maybe they shouldn't have given me that job. I was always running around pecking on the girls with the beak on my...
In the path leading up to the statue, the artist of the mural included 13 woodpeckers in it, in recognition of this childhood nickname. But this wasn't his first nickname, as he reveals in the book, Never Panic Too Early. In the second grade, we had a reading text titled Freddy the Green Frog. That became my nickname for a while. Stuart Allen Ruser acquired the nickname Smokey from his 1953 summer fire season, working as a US Fire Service smoke jumper, an occupation described as wildland firefighters who specialize in parachuting to fires in remote areas. No doubt Ruser joined NASA for a less hazardous job. Richard Francis Dick Gordon Jr. was another friend of Conrad's that got bestowed with one of his dubious nicknames. Conrad would call him the Animal. Some say it's because Gordon was particularly hairy, but it's probably got more to do with his animal magnetism with the ladies. Fellow Apollo 12 crew member Alan Laverne Bean was given the name Sarsaparilla during his naval days because he didn't drink alcohol. This combination of nicknames could have led to some interesting headlines. Edgar Dean Mitchell, the Apollo 14 lunar module pilot, who explored both outer space and inner space when he performed ESP experiments during his mission to the moon, was known as the Brain. Usually called Ed, he was one of the most intellectual men amongst the astronauts. He had deep thoughts and wrote a book called The Way of the Explorer. Shepard specifically asked for Mitchell to be on his crew because of his expertise on the lunar module. He knew he could lean on the rookie to take up the load of the lunar module systems. He said of Shepard, he still didn't know the lunar module like I did, adding that when it came to the lunar module's computer, he double-checked every entry that he made. Clifton Curtis Williams Jr. had his name shortened to C.C. Williams. Thomas Kenneth Mattingly II was also called TK, in a similar way that Stafford was sometimes called TP. Russell Louis Schweikart was called Rusty, and is probably the only Apollo astronaut to get an individual call sign when he was referred to as Red Rover when he exited the lunar module to perform his EVA. Group 4 astronaut Harrison Egan Schmidt quickly became known as Jack when he was younger, to avoid any confusion with his father, Harrison Ashley Schmidt. Later on in his geologist career, he acquired the name Bull Schmidt, probably more for his bullish attitude when approaching a task than anything else. Going head-to-head with Joe Engle for the Apollo 17 lunar module pilot's role, Schmidt got the role because he studied rocks, while Engle flew rocket planes. Dr. Rock, as he was sometimes referred to, got the assignment because of the scientific community's demand for a scientist to go to the moon. Ronald Elwin Evans Jr., the Apollo 17 command module pilot, who was better known as Ron, remained in lunar orbit aboard the command module America and was called Captain America by his colleagues. Some astronauts were known simply by variations of their name, like William Allison Anders, who was called Bill, although during his time serving in Iceland with the Air Force, his call sign was Viking. Apollo 13 command module pilot John Leonard Swigert Jr. went by the name Jack. Then there were the names Bino, Fredo, Gordo and Gino, although Gino called everyone Babe.
Oh, that's great, babe.
One astronaut who has his name sometimes incorrectly noted is Joe Engle. Born Joe Henry Engle, he is sometimes incorrectly called Joseph. One astronaut who acquired a nickname because of a mishap with his name was Don Fulton Isley. The story goes that while President Johnson was visiting the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, the Apollo 7 crew were introduced to him by Jim Webb, the administrator of NASA. Webb pronounced his name as Don Eisel, which no doubt brought a wry smile to Schirra's face. The mispronunciation resulted in Schirra adopting the name What's His Name, because it seemed that no one knew how to say his name correctly, and soon the crew were referred to as Wally Walt and What's His Name. On the day of launch, as the crew sat down to their traditional pre-launch breakfast, Isley found that his cup had been adorned with his name, his nickname that is. Finally, a shout out to the astronaut who got me started in all of this space stuff, George Driver Nelson. During April 1984, I can remember coming home from school and watching a TV news report about the latest space shuttle mission. I watched as an astronaut donned an MMU and jetted over to a satellite. Here, he tried to capture it by using a docking mechanism, but after this attempt failed, he tried an alternative method. Watching the astronaut holding onto a satellite with one hand, while trying to stop it from rotating by using the jets on his backpack, ignited my interest in the American manned space program. So hats off to you, Pinky Nelson.
Hey, that's great.
He had the misfortune to be shot down twice, once by the British and once accidentally by his own side.